Hello class, my name is Summer Revel. I did my presentation on job discrimination. I apologize from the beginning that my video card has decided to stop working about halfway through this class, so that's why you see the funny little swirls on the screen. Discrimination is the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people. It's a bias based on color, religion, ethnicity, age, disability, or gender. There's also labor market discrimination, which is if individual workers with identical productive characteristics are treated differently because of those groups. We also hear about wage discrimination, which most people think typically men to women, but all minorities or non-minorities are in categories within that, but it's, again, with equal productive characteristics are paid unequally, even though they're doing the same job and the same duties. There have been many laws enacted in order to try and fight against discrimination. The main one being Equal Pay Act of 1963, which was one of the first legislations ever created, prohibiting employers from paying different wages to men and women who perform essentially the same work under the same conditions. We also have Title VII, which means you cannot discriminate based on race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. There's the Equal Employment Opportunity Act, the Pregnancy Act, the American with Disabilities Act, which is a big one. Can't discriminate against any person with any kind of disability. And there's many state laws that actually go beyond the federal requirements. You just have to look them up within their states. The Equal Pay Act being the first one to try and prohibit employers from paying different wages to men and women, it's actually still very skewed. This slide shows the gender gap, wage gap. So as you can see, if you look towards the bottom, the second one from the bottom, chief executives. A woman, the lines going horizontal to the screen, only earns about 69% of what her male counterpart earns, doing the exact same job and the exact same duties. That, by all means, right there, violates the legislation of 1963. There are many problems with these discriminations, but, you look towards the top, bookkeeping, accounting, auditing clerks, stock clerks, they all make equal, if not more than what a male earns. The next slide shows our civilian labor force, the demographic groups to it. So if you look at the top lines, white, non-Hispanic males, basically. They make up a great majority of the workforce. But if you notice, on all the categories projected in 2020 is that white males will go down and every other group will increase, moving slowly to a more equal working force. This is the chart on the earnings percentage based on the various demographic groups. Males earn typically, based on 100%, earn more. Your white female is only going to earn about 70% of that. Asian males, however, very close. Your Asian females, 73%, and so on and so forth throughout the chart. This chart makes it very interesting is that based on your education, what a woman makes at doing the same job as their male counterpart. For example, age 25 to 34, high school graduate earns 75% of what their male counterpart earns. However, if you look all the way to the right, a master's degree only earns 69% of what their male counterpart earns. This doesn't make too many people want to go for higher education if you're going to earn less than what your male counterpart earns. That right there tells me there's a giant gap in discrimination. Many of the problems with discrimination, there's physical and emotional impacts, social, educational, financial impacts, the society and business impacts, and political, because all the legislation and stuff too. The big one is with communities and businesses that fail to take strong action on discrimination tend to be lower in productivity. You have workers that feel disgruntled. They lose interest in working hard. The morale is just failing. Trust and confidence in the part of the employees to their employers and managers, CEOs and whatnot. People with special skills or exceptional skills and abilities, they're not attracted to those different companies because they don't want to be discriminated against. Nobody wants to be told those are bad. It's some of the many problems and costs dealing with discrimination. You can also damage the reputation, appearing as a company who does not hire equally and is well known. Many people, one, will not shop or, use your products or services. They won't want to get hired there because they know how you work. Why are the costs so high? There's many reasons to why the costs are so high. Because companies are giving up people with good skills. They're not working to retain those employees. They're losing out. They're not putting employees in jobs to fully use those skills to productive capacity. The company is not retaining their employees. They're not being loyal to their employees. Therefore, they lose out on what that worker may have produced in order to do that. Solutions to some of these problems are they need to set a standard without placing any blame. When addressing discrimination, they need to be able to let the person know what is acceptable and what is not. Highlight specific behaviors, or it's harder when it comes to wages and stuff, but that's one thing where a situation needs to be addressed. As an employee, picking a moment. If you're experiencing discrimination, which happens far more than people realize, it's not always a good time to challenge the behavior right then, but pick a good time. Sometimes tact is best, even though if you have to, you move forward towards a lawsuit. Make a convincing case. Don't just spout off at the mouth. Have the backing. I don't want to say have the evidence, but really you need to have the evidence, not just my word against your word or your word against the manager. Have a convincing case. Some people take a bit of convincing when it comes to alerting to their own discriminatory practices. If you're talking to a manager, let them know what they're doing is wrong. If not, make the case to hire. As an employee, make sure you're working out a strategy. This all comes from an employee standpoint first. Work out the best strategy. Don't just jump on the grenade, so to speak. Think about all the possible scenarios. Seek advice from other people if must be. If you know somebody else who may have been discriminated against, ask them questions. You may be able to help. Lastly, as an employee, know your rights. Know what the laws are. Know what they can and cannot do. Companies fail because their employees are unhappy. It is estimated in many countries, inequality of wages and the discrimination that happens leads to an average income loss of 27% within the Middle East, North Africa, 19% in South Asia, 16% in Central Asia. This is all according to this 2013 study by the professors at the University of Sheffield and the University of Barcelona. The macroeconomic impact is that countries that put their talent to work are richer than countries that do not. Not just because fewer goods and services are produced, but because the economy tends to be less efficient. You need an efficient economy, though. Discrimination is a never-ending thing, no matter how much we try. Although the solutions can be out there, it's a natural human bias that we'll always find. So if the CEO's favorable to white males, the female's always going to end up with a lower wage, which means they're not being invested in to work harder. They'll end up in the unemployment line. Some women just want to be stay-at-home moms. They don't get the job experience they need. They end up with a low skill level because they're not being trained properly. There's a lot of reasons as to why the long-term effects of discrimination continue to hurt companies, because they fail to prioritize and put their employees first in order to continue to build their company. Companies should invest in their employees, in their skills, not because, they're white, green, orange, purple, brown, not because they're man or woman, not because of their sexuality. They need to help end the cycle if they want their company to succeed. The federal government needs to be more involved in creating proper legislation. I know we have all these laws and legislation policies and things out there that I mentioned. However, maybe it's time they're imposing greater fines on these companies that are continually ignoring discrimination policies, and continually you see lawsuits against the same companies over and over again. That's a problem where the federal government should be involved. Hopefully the job discrimination stops. I'm lucky enough, as an example, to work for Costco. They do not discriminate. However, certain managers within certain warehouses tend to. They always pick their favorite people to get cross-trained or things like that. So it does happen just on even a lower level, as simple as that. However, in the grand scheme of wages and pay, everything is equal across the board. Everybody starts off at the same wage. You get raises based on how much you work, how many hours you work, and from there it's just a matter if you get to come part-time, full-time. Benefits are all the same. It's a very equal workplace for the most part. However, as you start wanting to move up, sometimes they don't necessarily keep the best candidate to be maybe a supervisor or manager. They pick who they like within each warehouse. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes they don't always look at a resume. But that's where, as people and human beings, regardless, there's always going to be a bias, and that discrimination is always going to be there. We can just hope to lessen the effects of how it attacks a business profits, and keep workers happy. Invest in the human capital as opposed to anything else. Thank you for your time. If you guys have any questions, comments, please post in the section below.